Kieran wiped the sweat from his brow, squinting at the old calibrator in his hand. The faint hum of the small cargo vessel's engine provided a comforting backdrop as he worked. His workshop was a chaotic mess of tools, parts, and half-finished projects, a reflection of the mechanic's life. Functional, busy, but deeply solitary. He had always been a wanderer, moving between colonies, mining stations, and spaceports to offer his skills. Fixing ships was his trade, and though the pay was decent, the work lacked purpose. It was the same routine every day. Repair this engine, replace that circuit until something broke again. Kieran thought this day would be no different, but the universe had other plans. It started as a faint buzzing in his head, so subtle he initially mistook it for fatigue. He paused, rubbing his temples, and the sensation grew, a strange, persistent hum that resonated deep in his skull. His tools slipped from his hands as the feeling intensified, transforming into an overwhelming wave of soundless pressure. Then came the voice. "Help me." Kieran's vision blurred as he stumbled backward, his back slamming into a workbench. The words were not spoken in any language he recognized, yet he understood them with startling clarity. They echoed in his mind, accompanied by a sharp, visceral pain in his chest. "What the hell?" he muttered, gripping the edge of the bench to steady himself. The sensation faded as quickly as it had arrived, leaving him shaken and drenched in sweat. But it didn't leave him alone. The message was still there, insistent and unrelenting, as if carved into the fabric of his thoughts. He closed his eyes, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't just a plea, it was a set of coordinates. Kieran stumbled over to his ship's console, inputting the numbers with trembling fingers. The coordinates pointed to a sector deep in uncharted space. It was a place no sane pilot ventured, known for its derelict ships, dangerous anomalies, and pirate activity. "This has to be a mistake," he muttered, staring at the star map. Yet something about the message gnawed at him. It wasn't just a voice. It was a presence, an undeniable force that had reached across the void to find him. Kieran shook his head. "No way. This is crazy. You're not going." But the silence in his workshop felt heavier than ever. Hours passed, but Kieran couldn't shake the message. He tried to distract himself, throwing himself into his work, but his mind kept returning to the coordinates. Something or someone was out there, and it needed help. Eventually, he sighed and threw his wrench onto the workbench. "Fine, I'll check it out." But just a look. The Resolute groaned as its engines powered up, the small cargo ship systems coming to life. Kieran's heart raced as he set the course, the ship's navigation chart lighting up with a path toward the unknown. The journey took several days. Kieran spent the time oscillating between nervous anticipation and self-doubt. He ran diagnostics on his ship repeatedly, ensuring everything was in working order, while trying to imagine what could be waiting for him at the end of this trip. By the fourth day, the star map began to shift and the sector ahead came into view. His ship's scanners picked up faint energy readings, but nothing conclusive. The void stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by the occasional asteroid or drifting debris. Then he saw it. At first, it was just a blip on the radar, a faint signal that barely registered. But as the Resolute drew closer, the shape began to emerge. Kieran's breath caught in his throat. The ship was enormous, a colossal silhouette against the star-speckled void. Its sheer size defied belief, dwarfing the largest carriers Kieran had ever seen. The hull was a patchwork of alien design, its surface scarred and weathered from centuries adrift. Strange glyphs adorned its sides, glowing faintly with a dull, pulsating light. Kieran brought the Resolute to a halt, staring out of the cockpit window in awe. The ship looked like a sleeping giant, its vast frame lifeless, yet exuding a sense of latent power. "Is this what called me?" he whispered. The voice answered, startling him. "Yes." Kieran spun around, searching for the source of the sound. But there was no one else aboard. "Who's there?" he demanded. "I am the ship," the voice replied, calm but heavy with age. "My name is Eidolon. Kieran swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. "You're alive?" "In a manner of speaking," Eidolon said. "I am a hybrid, a vessel with sentience. My creators built me long ago to serve as their protector. But I am compromised." Kieran frowned. "Compromise how?" "I am infested," the ship explained, a hint of anguish in its tone. "Biological parasites have invaded my systems, corrupting my core functions and rendering me powerless. I have been adrift for centuries, unable to defend myself." Kieran's brow furrowed as he processed this information. He had heard stories of sentient AIs, but they were rare and typically bound to smaller-scale machines. A fully sentient battleship? That was unprecedented. "And you called me for help?" Kieran asked. "You possess the skills I require," Eidolon said simply. "Your expertise in mechanical repair makes you uniquely suited to remove the parasites and restore my systems." Kieran chuckled nervously. "Listen, I'm just a mechanic. I fix freighters and mining rigs. Whatever this is, it's way out of my league." "I disagree," the ship replied. "You have the knowledge and the tools. And you are here. That is enough." Kieran hesitated, glancing out the window at the massive vessel. Part of him wanted to turn back, to leave this ancient relic to its fate. But something about Eidolon's plea struck a chord in him. The ship's desperation reminded him of his own loneliness, the years he had spent drifting from one job to the next, searching for meaning. "All right," he said finally, "I'll see what I can do, but no promises." "Thank you," Eidolon said, and for a moment the voice almost sounded relieved. As Kieran maneuvered the Resolute into one of the ship's docking bays, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The vast interior was dimly lit, the walls lined with ancient machinery that looked both alien and familiar. He stepped out of his ship, a toolkit slung over his shoulder. The air was stale, and the faint hum of the ship's dormant systems filled the silence. "Where do I start?" he asked. "The infestation began in my lower decks," Eidolon replied. "You will find the source of the parasites there. Be cautious. They are hostile." Kieran's grip tightened on his wrench. "Great. Hostile parasites. Just what I needed." As he ventured deeper into the ship, the scale of the task ahead became clear. The corridors were lined with organic growths, pulsating, veined masses that clung to the walls like tumors. The sight made his stomach churn. He took a deep breath and activated his torch, stepping into the unknown, and so began the most dangerous repair job of his life. Kieran's boots echoed against the cold metal floors as he ventured deeper into Eidolon's labyrinthine corridors. The stale air clung to him, and the dim glow from the alien glyphs cast unsettling shadows along the walls. The ship felt alive, like it was breathing faintly beneath his feet, but it was an existence in decay. "This is worse than I thought," Kieran muttered. The deeper he went, the more evident the infestation became. What started as patches of organic growth on the walls quickly spread into grotesque, pulsating masses of flesh. They throbbed rhythmically, their surfaces slicked with a viscous fluid. Strange, vine-like tendrils snaked through the hallways, burrowing into Eidolon's once pristine circuitry. "What exactly are these parasites?" Kieran asked, his voice a little shakier than he intended. "They are biological organisms engineered for conquest," Eidolon explained. "A weapon created by an ancient civilization to devour and repurpose advanced technology. When I encountered their vessel, I believed myself immune to their attacks. I was wrong." Kieran grimaced, stepping carefully over a coiled tendril that twitched as he passed. "So they're like techno-organic scavengers?" "Precisely," Eidolon confirmed. "They have consumed my auxiliary systems and overridden significant portions of my neural network. Be cautious. They are aggressive when threatened." As if on cue, a skittering sound echoed from somewhere up ahead. Kieran froze, his pulse quickening. "What was that?" he whispered. "The parasites," Eidolon replied grimly. Kieran tightened his grip on his improvised flamethrower, a tool he had hastily assembled aboard the Resolute. He moved forward cautiously, his torchlight slicing through the darkness. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, its walls lined with alien machinery partially enveloped by the organic growths. Suddenly, a creature darted across his path, a small, insect-like thing with chitinous legs and glowing, lidless eyes. It paused for a moment, studying him, before emitting a shrill screech that sent a shiver down his spine. "That can't be good," Kieran muttered. The screech was answered by a chorus of similar cries. From the shadows, more creatures emerged, small at first, but soon joined by larger ones, their bodies armored with thick, black exoskeletons. They moved with unnatural speed, their limbs clicking against the floor as they closed in on him. "Run," Eidolon urged. Kieran didn't need to be told twice. He bolted down the nearest corridor, the creatures swarming behind him. He could hear their claws scraping against the walls, their guttural growls growing louder with each passing second. Spotting a service hatch, he dove through and slammed it shut behind him, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. The creatures scratched and hissed on the other side, but the hatch held firm. "That was too close," Kieran panted. "They are protecting the hive," Eidolon explained. "The infestation has spread deeply. They will not allow you to reach its core easily." Kieran glanced around the small maintenance shaft, its walls lined with exposed wires and panels. He wiped the sweat from his brow and tried to steady his nerves. "Okay, new plan. How do we cut these things off from your systems?" "There are critical nodes throughout my structure," Eidolon said. "If you sever their connections, it will weaken their hold and limit their coordination. However, doing so will likely provoke a stronger response." Kieran sighed. "Of course it will." The fight for control. Following Eidolon's guidance, Kieran made his way through the maintenance shafts, avoiding the main corridors where the parasites prowled. He emerged in one of the ship's secondary control rooms, a large chamber dominated by a central console. The room was in disarray. The console was partially consumed by the organic growths, their tendrils pulsating as they fed on the ship's power. Kieran approached cautiously, examining the alien mass. "I need to cut this off," he said, pulling out his tools. "Be quick," Eidolon warned. "The parasites will sense the disruption." Kieran activated his plasma cutter, the blade sparking as it sliced through the fleshy tendrils. The growths recoiled, emitting a high-pitched screech that made his ears ring. He worked quickly, severing the connections one by one. Suddenly, the room shook violently as the ship's alarms blared to life. "What's happening?" Kieran shouted over the noise. "The parasites have detected your actions," Eidolon replied. "They are redirecting their forces to your location." Kieran cursed under his breath, finishing the last cut before turning to the console. The screen flickered, and Eidolon's voice filled the room. "Good work. This node is secure, but they are coming. Prepare yourself." Kieran didn't have to wait long. The door to the control room burst open, and a horde of parasites flooded in. He raised his flamethrower, unleashing a torrent of fire that engulfed the first wave. The creatures shrieked as they burned, their bodies collapsing into smoldering heaps. But more kept coming. Kieran fought desperately, his flamethrower running low on fuel. He grabbed an improvised grenade from his belt and hurled it into the crowd. The explosion rocked the room, scattering the creatures and buying him a moment to escape. He sprinted back into the maintenance shafts, the remaining parasites in pursuit. A desperate gamble. By the time Kieran reached the next node, he was exhausted and running low on supplies. His body ached, and his breathing was labored, but he pressed on. The second control room was in even worse shape than the first. The organic growths were thicker here, their roots embedded deeply into Eidolon systems. Kieran hesitated, knowing this would be an even greater challenge. "I can guide you," Eidolon said, "but you must hurry." Kieran set to work, cutting through the growths and repairing the damaged circuits beneath. The parasites swarmed again, but this time he was ready. He had rigged several traps along the corridors leading to the room, using spare parts and explosives from his toolkit. The explosions reverberated through the ship, buying him precious time to finish his work. When he severed the final connection, the ship shuddered and a low, resonating hum filled the air. "What was that?" Kieran asked. "My systems are beginning to recover," Eidolon replied. "You have weakened the infestation significantly. Their hive will no longer be able to coordinate their forces effectively." Kieran allowed himself a small smile. "Good. Now let's finish this." A turning point. Kieran made his way back to the Resolute to resupply and regroup. He sat in the cockpit, staring out at the massive vessel around him. Despite the danger, he felt a sense of determination. "This ship deserves a second chance," he said quietly. "We're not done yet." With Eidolon's guidance, he prepared for the final assault. The parasites' hive lay in the lower decks, a tangled nest of organic mass that served as their central control. If he could destroy it, the infestation would be eradicated, but the journey there would be the most dangerous yet. As Kieran stepped out of the Resolute once more, he knew there was no turning back. The ship's corridors stretched ahead of him, dark and foreboding, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, he wasn't just fixing something broken. He was fighting for something greater. Kieran tightened the straps on his reinforced vest and slung his modified plasma cutter over his shoulder. He checked the charges on his makeshift grenades and the fuel in his flamethrower. Every piece of equipment he had was jury-rigged, cobbled together from the Resolute's sparse inventory. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. "You're sure this is the only way?" he asked, staring down the long corridor leading into the lower decks of Eidolon. "Yes," the ship replied, its voice steady but grave. "The hive is the infestation's core. Destroy it, and the parasites will lose their ability to coordinate and regenerate." Kieran sighed. "You make it sound simple. I'm guessing it won't be." "It will not," Eidolon admitted. "The hive is heavily defended. Be prepared." He adjusted his gear one last time and took a deep breath. "All right, let's do this." The descent. The lower decks of Eidolon were a stark contrast to the rest of the ship. Here, the infestation had taken full control. The walls were no longer recognizable as metal. They were coated in a thick, fleshy substance that pulsed faintly, as if alive. Strange, bioluminescent growths dotted the corridors, casting an eerie green glow over everything. Kieran moved cautiously, his footsteps muffled by the organic carpet underfoot. Every so often, he heard distant skittering or the faint, wet sound of something shifting in the shadows. "Keep going," Eidolon urged. "You are close." Kieran turned a corner and froze. Ahead of him, a massive creature loomed, its grotesque form nearly filling the corridor. It was a fusion of metal and flesh, its body bristling with spikes and covered in writhing tendrils. The creature let out a guttural roar, its glowing eyes locking onto him. "Great," Kieran muttered. "Big one." The creature charged, its bulk shaking the corridor. Kieran dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the impact as it slammed into the wall. He rolled to his feet and fired a burst from his flamethrower, the flames licking across the creature's hide. It screeched in pain, but it didn't stop. Kieran tossed a grenade at its feet and ducked behind a support column. The explosion rocked the hallway, sending chunks of flesh and metal flying. When the smoke cleared, the creature was down, its body twitching as it dissolved into a puddle of viscous goo. "That's one problem solved," Kieran muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "More will come," Eidolon warned. "Of course they will," Kieran replied, already moving deeper into the ship. The hive. After what felt like hours of tense navigation and brutal skirmishes, Kieran finally reached the heart of the infestation. The hive was a massive chamber, its walls and ceiling entirely consumed by the parasites. The air was thick with a nauseating organic stench, and the sound of squelching and chittering was deafening. At the center of the chamber stood the hive core, a towering, pulsating mass of flesh and machinery. It was a grotesque amalgamation of Eidolon systems and the parasites' organic growths, glowing faintly with an unnatural light. "That's it?" Kieran asked, staring at the monstrosity. Yes, Eidolon confirmed. Destroy it, and the infestation will collapse. Kieran nodded, gripping his flamethrower tightly. All right, let's end this. He stepped into the chamber, but the moment he did, the hive reacted. The walls came alive, disgorging countless parasites of all shapes and sizes. They poured into the room, their screeches echoing as they swarmed toward him. Kieran set his flamethrower to maximum output and unleashed a torrent of fire, sweeping it across the advancing horde. The smaller creatures were incinerated instantly, their bodies crumbling into ash. The larger ones pressed forward, but Kieran met them with grenades and precise shots from his plasma cutter. Despite his efforts, the parasites kept coming. Eidolon, any ideas? He shouted over the cacophony. There is a structural weakness in the hive core, the ship replied. A plasma charge placed at its base will destabilize it. Got it, Kieran said, pulling out the last of his explosives. He fought his way to the base of the hive core, dodging attacks and blasting parasites as he went. The core loomed above him, its surface writhing with tendrils and glowing veins. He placed the charge carefully, setting the timer for a 2-minute delay. As he activated the timer, the hive let out a deafening roar, and the entire chamber began to shake. I think it knows what I'm doing. Kieran shouted. Run! Eidolon urged. Kieran didn't need to be told twice. He turned and sprinted for the exit, the parasites in furious pursuit. The chamber began to collapse around him, chunks of flesh and debris raining down as the hive core destabilized. He barely made it into the corridor when the charge detonated. The collapse. The explosion rocked the entire ship, a shockwave tearing through the lower decks. The hive core imploded, taking the majority of the infestation with it. The parasites that remained screamed in agony, their bodies convulsing before crumbling into ash. Kieran stumbled through the collapsing corridors, smoke and debris filling the air. His lungs burned, and his legs felt like lead, but he pushed forward, driven by sheer determination. Eidolon, he gasped. Is it over? The infestation is collapsing, the ship replied. But you must leave quickly. This section will not hold. Kieran pushed himself harder, finally reaching a maintenance shaft that led back to the upper decks. He climbed as fast as he could, the walls shaking around him. When he emerged into the safety of the upper levels, he collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. You did it, Eidolon said, its voice filled with relief. Kieran let out a weak laugh. Barely. Restoration. Over the next few days, Kieran worked tirelessly to repair Eidolon systems. With the infestation eradicated, the ship's systems began to recover, and its vast arsenal of technology slowly came back online. This is incredible, Kieran said, marveling at the ship's capabilities. Thanks to you, I am whole again, Eidolon replied. I owe you a great debt. Kieran chuckled. Just promise not to get infested again, all right? The ship's voice carried a hint of amusement. Agreed. As the last of the repairs were completed, Eidolon revealed its full potential. The ship was more than a battleship. It was a fortress, equipped with weaponry and defenses far beyond anything Kieran had ever seen. You could take on an entire fleet, Kieran said in awe. That is my purpose, Eidolon replied. To protect and to fight. Kieran stood in the cockpit of his small Resolute, staring out at the massive ship. He had come here as a simple mechanic, but he was leaving as something more. What will you do now? He asked. I will fulfill my purpose, Eidolon said. And you, Kieran? Will you join me? Kieran thought for a moment, then smiled. Yeah, I think I will. Kieran stood on the bridge of Eidolon, surveying the expanse of stars beyond the ship's massive viewport. The once-infected vessel was now fully restored, its systems humming with renewed energy. The alien glyphs that had once pulsed with erratic life now glowed with steady purpose. Eidolon was alive, powerful, and ready for war. Status report, Kieran said, his voice carrying a newfound authority. All systems are operational, Eidolon replied. Weapons, shields, propulsion, and communications are functioning at full capacity. The infestation has been completely eradicated. Repairs to my outer hull are at 90% completion. Kieran grinned. Not bad for a ship that was on the brink of death. It is thanks to your efforts, Eidolon said. You have given me a second chance. He leaned against the console, his fingers brushing over the smooth, alien interface. You've got all this power, but what's next? You said your purpose was to protect and fight. Who or what are we fighting? There was a brief pause before Eidolon answered. The parasites were not an isolated threat, the ship explained. They are the product of a hostile civilization that seeks to consume and repurpose advanced technology across the galaxy. I was created to stand against them. However, my creators are long gone. I have been drifting incomplete for centuries. Kieran frowned. So this civilization is still out there, spreading these parasites? Yes, Eidolon confirmed. Their forces operate on a vast scale, targeting worlds and fleets indiscriminately. They will come again. Kieran exhaled slowly. The stakes were far higher than he had imagined. Well, then, he said, straightening, let's make sure you're ready for them. Upgrades and integration. Over the next few weeks, Kieran worked alongside Eidolon to optimize its systems. With his mechanical expertise and the ship's advanced AI, they developed new enhancements that took Eidolon's already formidable design to the next level. One of their first projects was integrating a new type of modular weapon system. Kieran used scavenged parts from the Resolute and Eidolon's dormant reserves to create deployable drone swarms that could perform reconnaissance or engage in combat. These drones are like an extension of you, Kieran explained as he fine-tuned the programming. You'll be able to control them directly or let them operate autonomously. Impressive, Eidolon remarked. Their versatility will prove invaluable. They also upgraded Eidolon's propulsion systems, making the ship faster and more maneuverable. Despite its massive size, Eidolon now moved with an agility that defied expectations. Finally, they fortified the ship's defenses, adding layers of adaptive shielding and reinforced armor. Kieran's innovations, combined with Eidolon's advanced technology, created a vessel that was nearly indestructible. I have never felt so complete, Eidolon said. Kieran wiped grease from his hands and smiled. Good, because if these parasites creators come knocking, I want them to regret it. The signal. Just as they were finishing the last round of upgrades, Eidolon detected a faint, encoded signal originating from a distant star system. Kieran, the ship said, its tone urgent. I am receiving a transmission. It appears to be a distress signal. He frowned, setting down his tools. From who? Unknown, Eidolon replied. The signal matches no known human or alien frequencies. It may be a trap, but it is worth investigating. Kieran thought for a moment, then nodded. If someone's in trouble, we can't ignore it. Set a course. Arrival in the war zone. When Eidolon arrived at the source of the signal, they found themselves in a system on the edge of a nebula. The scene before them was chaos. A small fleet of battered ships was under attack by a swarm of parasite-controlled vessels. The attackers were sleek and organic in design, their surfaces rippling with living tissue. They're here, Kieran muttered, staring at the tactical display. Yes, Eidolon said. This fleet appears to be an alliance of smaller civilizations. They are no match for the parasites. Kieran's jaw tightened. Then let's even the odds. He sat in the captain's chair, gripping the armrest as Eidolon powered up its weapons. The battle. The parasites didn't notice Eidolon at first. The massive ship slipped into the battle undetected, using its advanced cloaking systems to assess the situation. The Allied fleet was in disarray, their ships falling one by one under the relentless assault. Kieran, Eidolon said, I am ready to engage. Then let's make an entrance, Kieran replied. Eidolon decloaked and unleashed a devastating barrage of plasma cannons and missile salvos. The parasite ships were caught off guard, several of them obliterated before they could react. Kieran watched as the tactical display lit up with enemy signals, converging on their position. "They're focusing on us," he said. "As expected," Eidolon replied. "But they will not prevail." The parasites swarmed, but Eidolon was ready. Its adaptive shields absorbed incoming fire, while its newly deployed drones flanked the attackers, tearing through their ranks with precision. Kieran directed the battle from the bridge, calling out targets and adjusting tactics on the fly. The combination of his strategic mind and Eidolon's firepower was unstoppable. One by one, the parasite ships fell. The aftermath. When the battle was over, the Allied fleet sent a cautious transmission to Eidolon. "This is Captain Varn of the Lance of Dawn," a voice said. "To whom do we owe our lives?" Kieran stepped forward, speaking into the comms. "This is Kieran, and this is Eidolon. We're here to help." There was a pause before Varn replied, his voice tinged with awe. "Your ship, it's unlike anything we've seen. Are you human?" Kieran smirked. "Something like that." A new alliance. Over the following days, Kieran and Eidolon worked with the remnants of the Allied fleet. They shared intelligence about the parasites and their creators, learning that the invaders had been targeting civilizations across the sector for decades. "You're not alone in this fight," Kieran told Captain Varn during a strategy meeting. "Eidolon and I are building something here, a force to push back against the parasites and their masters." Varn nodded. "If you're leading the charge, we'll follow." Word of Eidolon's victory spread quickly, drawing other ships and factions to their cause. The once abandoned warship was now the cornerstone of an emerging resistance. The ultimate war machine. As the fleet grew, so did Eidolon's role. No longer just a lone guardian. The ship became the nerve center of a coordinated effort to reclaim the galaxy from the parasite threat. Kieran's leadership and ingenuity, combined with Eidolon's power, inspired hope in those who had long thought the fight was lost. "We've come a long way," Kieran said one day, standing on the bridge and watching the fleet assemble around them. "Yes," Eidolon replied, "but the journey is far from over." Kieran smiled. "Good, because I'm just getting started." And with that, the ultimate war machine set its sights on the stars, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.